A good night's sleep and the rising of the sun didn't make Vale any better in his eyes. The Ark family had retreated to the hotel after the concert night, and thankfully, nothing had happened to ruin things any further. But that still left another full day in Vale for him, which he was currently spending with his sisters. He tried to derail that plan, to claim sickness and hide in his room until it was time to go home. That had lasted about as long as it took Sapphire to pick some clothes and Sable to threaten to dress him, with a casual reminder of how she used to do that when he was a baby. "What the hell's up with you?" Hazel sighed over her milkshake, flicking a bit of chocolate foam his way. "You keep looking around like you expect the fucking cops to pop out. You do anything to that Schnee girl we ought to know about?" "What? No. I'm just, well, you know, feeling a little under the weather." "Not that bull again." Jean frowned at her, but he didn't say anything. They couldn't understand. Hell, he barely understood. But the events of the previous day had proven beyond a doubt that something was going on. Something he didn't like, and wasn't going to be tricked into. "Let go of my ears," a familiar voice complained, like she had been for the last 10 goddamned minutes. What a jerk. Amber growled until her Sunday, the look on her face saying she wanted nothing more than to murder whoever it was. Jean had half expected it to be Cardin, but that probably would have been too much. Instead, Velvet looked to be being bullied by some children. Children. He half wanted to go over there and knock some sense into her. She was a huntress, damn it. Act like it and make either of them stop or walk away. Don't just stand there waiting for someone, for him, to come and make it stop. Oh, yes. Jean had come to the realization very quickly that this day was shaping up to be just like the previous. I don't care. I'm not falling for this crap. "I've got half a mind to go over there and kick their asses," Hazel said. Jean sighed as he gripped her wrist. With her, half a mind was more than enough. "You'll make it worse. If you do anything to them, they'll just take it out on her once you're gone." The older girl looked like she wanted to argue, the words forming in her head, before she looked away with a silent snare. Velvet would be fine. She was stronger than she looked. "You guys finished with your treats?" he asked, looking at the 7 girls as they polished off their snacks. "Why don't we go check out somewhere else? I hear there's a big mall near here." Their cheers were muted, but they each stood up nonetheless. He knew they hated the idea of leaving her behind, but there was really nothing they could do. You couldn't change the mind of people in an instant, especially not with violence. "So how do you know your way around here so well?" Cora asked as they walked off towards the mall. "We've never been to Vale, yet you knew where this parlor was and the mall," asked the receptionist at the hotel. He lied. She wouldn't give me her number, but she'd give me some ideas of where we could all go. Probably to get rid of you. Jade teased. "Guess our little brother isn't as hot as he thinks he is. And yet, I still managed to have more partners in the last month or 2 than you have, ever?" "Yeah, well, I'm saving myself." Jade growled and looked away. "Besides, you had to say partners. You haven't even had a proper girlfriend yet." He waved one hand with a grin. "I'm not really looking for a serious relationship." "Well, you've exceeded at that. Not a girl in Ansel would ever take you as their boyfriend with your rap." "A wandering minstrel has not the time for such attachments," he waxed. Some of the girls laughed. Most rolled their eyes. Jean found his own eyes narrowing, however, as he felt the telltale sign of hostile intent. It didn't take long to see him, mainly due to the ugly grin on his face. Cardin Winchester walked down the street with a swagger that felt entirely too put on, arms swinging wildly as he stepped forward with both his feet and shoulders at the same time, like some kind of weird sway. It was easy to ignore the teen. He'd done it time and time again, so he simply stepped aside when they were about to pass him by. Unfortunately, he'd forgotten that this was Cardin he was dealing with. "Hey, watch where you're walking." The ginger teen growled, pushing with both his hands. It was hardly an impressive shove, but it was enough to knock him a few feet back since he wasn't ready for it. He'd stepped clear aside to let Cardin pass. But of course, he had stepped with Jean. He wanted to bump into someone after all. Walking down the street like you own it, maybe you should step aside for a hero of Vale. Don't rise to the bait. Sorry, I wasn't watching where I was going. No harm done, right? His sisters watched on, even as he tried to send some kind of telepathic message for them not to interfere. It would just be like Hazel or Jay to try and step in to break this up. Probably by antagonizing Cardin. But this was an answer, and this wasn't a snot-nosed brat who crawled with a little confidence. Cardin had aura, training, and a weapon. And say what you would about his character, he knew how to use them. I don't want any trouble. Yeah, well, maybe you should have thought of that before slamming into me. Another shove, this time with both hands. He could have resisted it. Hell, he could have grabbed the boy's arms and slammed him to the ground, broken every bone in his body. But he did nothing, allowing himself to stagger back as the other teen connected. You're going to just attack a civilian? Jean asked, when he's just trying to show his sisters around town? Or were you planning to hit them too when they were trying to protect me? Gonna run to your sisters to help you? He snarled. I suppose it makes sense. Just keep hiding behind your wall, civilian. Maybe when the Grim come, one of the heroes will care enough to help you out. Cardin's shoulder slammed into his as the boy walked by, vicious grin showing that he felt he gained more than enough from this encounter. Jean didn't even react, instead, turning back to his sisters with a raised brow. Lovely people in Vale, hey? Sapphire frowned. Why didn't you protect yourself? Dad's taught you more than enough to stand up for yourself. Just about every other girl nodded. Some, such as Amber and Hazel, looking more than a little frustrated with his submissive display. What had they expected? That he would tear his shirt off and fly into action, suplex Cardin Winchester through a nearby window? It was bullying. He faced it just about every other repeat and gave it the attention it deserved. Absolutely none. How could you be offended by the actions and opinions of people you didn't value the opinion of? It wouldn't have solved anything. He shrugged instead. Besides, it's not like I lose anything by letting him win. Everyone here knows he was the one that ended up looking stupid. It wasn't enough for them. That much was clear. But if these encounters had been thrown before him to try and elicit some reaction, then the best choice was to do nothing every time. Just ignore every single person and bide out his time until they went home. Anyway, here's Vale's Central Mall. About 100 or so overpriced shops, all packed beneath one bird poo-stained roof. So romantic. Cora brushed past him, no doubt in the direction of the bookstore. Why don't you look after Amber while us women have some time to shop? I'm a woman, Amber piped up. Oh. Lavender smiled and leaned down. So you want to come clothes shopping with me and Sapphire? I'm not a woman. Come on then, my little gender-confused sibling. Jean rolled his eyes and placed a hand on top of her head. Let's go play some games at the arcade. Yeah! Let it be said that if you visited one arcade, you visited them all. Vale might have had at least 3 times as many machines, but that barely accounted for the 10 times as many snot-nosed brats running around. It was still the same plethora of chaos and beeping that spent so much time back at Ansel. For Amber, though, it was like an entirely new world. Oh, Jean, look! House of Grim 4, Bullhead Racing, Hunting Simulator! The latter had a long queue of kids behind it, and was a machine featuring all kinds of plastic swords, axes, and guns. No prizes for guessing the game wasn't about hunting elk or any other wild animal. He tried to lose himself in the sounds, in the machines, but he couldn't quite get rid of the tenseness in his shoulders, nor the way his hands balled into fists. He could only be glad she didn't notice, too entrapped by all the games. Why don't you do some bullhead racing first? he offered, leading her over to the empty machine. It would be fine. He just needed to waste a few hours here with Amber, have some fun, then retire to the hotel. Repeat that again the following day and it would be all done. He'd be home. Beacon would start, and no matter what happened, there would be no way for him to get in. The clunk of some line falling through the slots heralded the start of the race. His little sister grinning over at him as she gripped the controls. What a day. He groaned as he entered his room, thankful for the fact that he was the only boy, so he got one to himself. The mattress bounced him back up as he threw himself down on it, holding an arm across his vision. What a fucking day. He didn't normally swear, but honestly, the day deserved it. Velvet in the morning, Carden bumping into him. He'd seen Ren and Nora at the arcades, though he managed to stuff Amber into another game and hide with her. That would have been a close call since he recalled he promised to meet both of them at Beacon. Nora was just crazy enough to try and force the issue too. And even if they didn't, disappointment from his team was something he didn't want to see. The whole reason he'd been so fervent in getting away from Pyrrha, said he couldn't see the disgust in her eyes. Then once they met back up with the rest of them, he caught sight of a distinctive red hood bobbing behind some shelves. Hazel was the only one who could have recognized Ruby, but luckily he managed to distract and lead them all away by offering to carry their bags. That had also given him the perfect place to hide his snare as they walked past Emerald, who just so happened to be wandering down the street. Of course, she was just another random woman to everyone else. But the fury, not to mention the urge to murder, had been very strong. That would have been one way to ensure he didn't get into Beacon, though maybe a little extreme. Things hadn't even stopped after that. Coco and Fox walking down the road beside them, Lavender chatting to Skylark of all people at the bus stop, not to mention him meeting with Dove, who had chosen to start flirting with Sable. The whole day had been an exercise in keeping a straight face while also resisting the urge to start screaming and run away. But none of it mattered. It didn't matter how many people he ran into, nor how many he saw or talked to. I don't care, he growled into the pillow, using it to muffle a scream of rage. Energy spent, he rolled onto his back, staring up at the patterns dancing their way across the ceiling. Why won't you let me go? I don't want any of this. The ceiling didn't answer. The squeaking bed and thumps from the next door did. Jean groaned, bringing the cushion back over his head as the sounds of feminine moans came through the sound-insulated walls. Well, this weekend officially got worse. Oh, Nikki. For the love of... Don't you have enough kids? Jean shouted, banging a fist on the wall. He doubted they heard him, however, considering the noise continued. He couldn't blame this one on fate, or whatever was ruining his day. This was just his bloody mum and dad doing what naturally came. You think they would have learned after the 8th? It was fine. He could withstand it. They would finish soon enough and he could get some sleep. If only he thought to bring some music and headphones, he would be okay. But the whole trip had been rushed enough that he hadn't thought to. The pillow felt wonderful as he tried to smother himself with it, but even the sweet embrace of approaching death didn't seem to be enough to drown out the noise. It continued for another few minutes, the sound ticking by as he tried to think of anything other than what was going on. Lessons, husband, Roman bloody Torchwick. It was all undone every time his mother moaned. I'm done, he said at last, throwing the pillow aside and pulling on some shoes. There was no other way he was going to get any sleep listening to that. Jean-Arc knew exactly what he needed. Another. A glass fluttered down before him, the burly man behind the bar taking his previous one and running a cloth round the inside. Jean paid no attention, reaching for the new offered and downing it in one. He wished it around his mouth, savoured it, before swallowing with a single gulp. The glass wobbled as it fell back into the bar, but against all odds, remained standing. Your vodka tastes like water. That's because it is water, the man snapped back. I'm cutting you off. You've had enough. Who cuts off a paying customer? One who doesn't want to have to carry said customer out the door. You're lucky I even let you in without an ID. The man reached out to flick Jean in the forehead. Instincts drilled in for years of combat slammed to the front of his drunken mind, causing his hand to lash out. He grabbed air, a good few inches away from the man's hand. See? The blonde slumped. Well, crap. It had happened again. Every time, at some point or another, he went to a bar or got hold of some alcohol. Sometimes, it was in the training period before Beacon, a tour to take off some gruesome memories and muscular pain. Sometimes, it wasn't until Beacon, some kind of outing with his team or just a way of reducing stress. It was good for so many things. Forgetting, distracting, and wasting time. No one could call Jean-Arc an alcoholic. At least, not in the same way one could claim Crow. But he had more than enjoyed a drink, especially the time he'd gone out with said man. What a night. But there was one little problem. Something he tended to forget each time. As memories and experience muddled, his tolerance didn't come back with him. It didn't matter if he had some right away or a year after returning. Each time he would still be a young man with a body that didn't know how to handle his liquor. He had had so many humiliating first experiences he could barely recall them. Being carried back to his room by Yang, Ren, Sun, Neptune, hell, even Nora one time. Though, not before the girl had had her fun drawing things on his face. And now it looked like he'd be dragging himself home. Enjoy. Right. Well, you okay to let me nurse this till my head stops spinning? Fine with me, kid. The bearded man sighed, refilling the glass from a tap. I'd rather you walk out under your own power. Just don't try anything. I've told the others you've been cut off. Yeah. At least no one else to see it this time. At least he'd managed to waste a good 2 hours. That meant there was only the marrow to survive. The first day with the concert had gone... well, it had gone terribly. But good enough that he hadn't been drafted into Beacon. The second day had been a test of endurance against all his former friends and enemies. There was just the final day left, and if he could spend that in his room recovering from a killer hangover, then that would be a day well spent. I'm on the home stretch, and it smells like vomit. It was still better than the taste of ash mixed with his own blood. He could perhaps be forgiven then, considering how lost within his own memories he was, for not noticing the drama taking place beside him until it was too late. His first indication was a body sitting on the stool beside him, one bare arm entering his vision as she leaned on the bar. Yo! Yang Zhao Long grinned at him. Looks like somebody's been having a party. Oh god. Jean groaned, wiping one hand down his face in a vain event to wash away the horror. Not you. Well, my reputation precedes me, I see, unless you're someone I turned down at Signal. That she had to ask for clarification was bad enough. How many boys had asked her out? Why? Oh, why did she have to be here? Was it not enough for him to have everyone else pushed before his eyes all day, without the last solace being taken from him? Ignoring her would be the best bet. She was like a cat in that regard, always thriving off the attention of others. In a very real way, she worked like her semblance, getting stronger the more someone focused on her. No words? Or have I rendered you speechless? He wouldn't rise to the bait, no matter how tempting it was. Yang was easy and fun, always up for a laugh and good to talk to. When she got used to you, anyway. She was also one of the few that he'd never had sexual relationships with, romantic or otherwise. It would be oh so easy to fall into a casual conversation with her. He wouldn't fall for that trap. Yeesh, tough crowd. Hey, bartender, strawberry sunrise. Make sure to include one of those little umbrellas too. It was none of his business. She was nothing to him. None of them were. Aren't you a little young for a place like this? Funny. You serve him but not me? I learn from my mistakes. Luckily, if he's able to walk out on his own legs. Yang punched him in the arm. Hard. Ha! Looks like you're a lightweight, champ. I wouldn't call 11 glasses of vodka mixes a lightweight. Hey Junior Zhao grunted. I'd be impressed with how much he managed, if I wasn't annoyed at how badly he took it. Ignore me. Look elsewhere. Not bad. Maybe there's hope for you yet. Anyway, Junior, I hear you're pretty good for information here in Vale. Zhon's eyes flickered to the side as she spoke, interested despite himself. So she wasn't here just to haunt him. What was she here for then? Just his luck to choose a bar that housed criminal contacts too. Probably the reason they'd been willing to let him in without any form of identification. Teach me to ignore the obvious signs. Been out of the job for a little over 2 years and I'm already out of touch. It's been said, Hay played on the side of caution. Good enough for me. I want to know if you have any information on this woman. Yang held out her scroll towards the man, who leaned in to take a look at the image. The older man hummed lightly as he folded over, before shaking his head with a sigh. Yang cursed. Crap. What about you, champ? Think you can help a beautiful girl out? Before he could comment, before he could even point out that he wanted nothing to do with her, and he could hardly see straight anyway, the scroll was pushed into his face. He could tell from the grin she wore that she didn't expect anything. She was teasing him, and nothing else, trying to see if she could get a rise out of him. Blue eyes, dark from alcohol, focused on the screen. A second later, his face twisted in a hateful grimace. Raven Branwen. The glass in his hand cracked, water spilling over his fingers. Don't get angry. Don't react. It was hard to let go, infinitely so, as he loosened each finger individually before looking away from that woman. He had no idea whose side she was on, even now. But she wasn't on his. He would never trust her. No idea. He wasn't sure what happened. It felt like he'd taken the room with both hands, given it a good spin and then let it go. Ceiling became floor, and ceiling once more. People, stools, and tables flashing around him as he danced through the air weightless. Something caught him, hard and unyielding against his cheek. It took a few woozy blinks for him to realize it was the floor, and that people were screaming. Bull, she growled. He'd have known this voice even if he were blindfolded, and how badly his mind was swimming, it might as well be. Something stung, and it took a long second for him to realize it was his cheek. You hit me? It was more of a question than a statement. Mainly because he still wasn't quite sure. All he knew was that something hurt. His day was already awful, and now Yang was trying to get in his way too? To ruin everything he'd planned. You know her. No one reacts like that to someone they've never met. Yang's eyes were already red. Fancy that. He hadn't even done anything to activate her semblance and she was already half gone. Tell me everything you know. Fuck you. Someone shouted from the side. Dancers ran left and right, creating an open space around them as people desperately found somewhere else to be. In the distance, he could just make out Hay shouting for them to stop, but he was already gone. Yang was no better. You want to rephrase that? She said, slipping into a wide-legged stance. Ambroselia hadn't made an appearance yet, Not in its full form, but that was likely only because he was unarmed. Because he looked unarmed. Only a fool relied on their weapon. You didn't spar against Pyrrha for over 80 years without learning to fight when disarmed. I've had more than enough of this. Something snapped within him. More than enough of you. He meant plural. All of them. Torturing him. Reminding him of what he was giving up. What he was going to sacrifice. Couldn't they see it was for their own good? Couldn't they understand that? There was a voice somewhere. It sounded like it was inside his own mind, telling him to calm down, to stop doing this. That voice went ignored when the woman before him flung a fist towards his face. Another person screamed, voices raised in panic as he stepped to the side, tilting his head so that her fist whistled past his nose. Even inebriated as he was, his mind still knew what to do, sending a palm down the girl's arm towards her chest. It would be enough to stun her, give him some time to get a good hit in. It should have been enough, if he wasn't so damn slow. Fingers curled around his own like a vice, drawing him across her body as she flipped him over her shoulder. He just about managed to strike her face on the way over. More of a distraction than to cause any damage. It was enough to have her release him, so that he could land on a nearby table instead of being slammed into the ground at her feet. Bottles turned to shards beneath him, sending a wave of glass flying in every direction. If you ask nicely, then I might be willing to let you give up and tell me what you know. You're a real piece of work. Jean staggered out of the mess, glass falling from his body like sparkling snow. Was this fate? Interfering in his life once more? Bad luck? Ha! What a joke. Meeting one of them was bad luck. This was design. Didn't your mother ever teach you any manners? Or are you such a disappointment that she ran off? It was a low blow. He knew that. Never would he have considered speaking such words to someone he respected so much. Not in any other situation. But she reacted exactly as he expected her to. The blow might have torn his head clean off had it hit. Yang had always been sloppy when angry, however, allowing him to duck beneath it and slam a fist beneath her ribcage. He'd have loved to get another in, but even drunk off his ass, he knew enough about her fighting style to know that that was a bad idea. You had three options with Yang. You could overwhelm her in a single strike, instantly destroying her. So far he'd only seen Adam ever pull off such a feat, and even then, she'd been exhausted before the fight. You could what he affectionately termed Neo her, which was to say pull off flips and dodges that would snap a normal person's body in two, redirect all her force that she defeated herself. Again, he'd only seen one person ever manage that. The last option was to whittle her down, one blow at a time, like a man chipping away at a brick wall with bare fists. Never enough to trigger her semblance. Never enough for her to throw back at you. It was slow and gruesome work, but right now, that was just what he needed to take the edge off. Booze was one thing. There was nothing like a good fight to really get the blood pumping. He'd almost forgot the sensation. Red eyes narrowed as she struck, a straight punch that he managed to lean away from, followed by a roundhouse kick that he knew was coming. She'd kept him on the defensive with blistering series of attacks, but he was able to keep ahead of them. It wasn't through skill, however. Not when his body was untrained and also hammered. It was hard to not know her style, considering she had taught it to him. Slip to the side, one arm to block her kick, step back as it transferred into an axe kick, duck in and hit her in the shoulder, back out again. His grin only got wider as the fight continued, as he pushed her back. It was after one particularly satisfying punch to her cheek that sent her staggering to the side that things went wrong. Ugh! Enough! She screamed, suddenly dashing forward with more speed she'd shown before. His hands fell onto a block instinctively, but the grin on her face told him he'd messed up. It wasn't her style. She didn't faint like that, but apparently to get back at him she'd make an exception. Jean choked on air as an elbow slammed into his lower back, sending him staggering forward. Any progress was halted by her knee, which dove into his stomach with enough force to have him bend over. He wasn't sure what happened next, except that something tight gripped his back, and then he was smashing through what seemed to be a pillar of glass. Music swirled to a stop as he landed, skidding and bouncing across the dance floor. There was a tinkering sound as she walked up to him, little pieces of glass clicking as they were crushed beneath her boots. Was that blood dribbling down his face? Does it hurt? Does it hurt? The scene before him seemed to flicker. Blonde hair flashing to black. He could taste blood in his mouth. Blood and ash. No, there was no ash. The things, they were on fire. Tell me everything you know, she growled. Tell her? Tell her what? Who all his friends were? So she could find and kill them? He'd never rat them out, no matter what she did to him. His collar twisted as she lifted him up, bangs dropping across his eyes as he tried to see past the haze of smoke. Alcohol? No, smoke. There was fire. Wasn't there? Had she dragged him from the girders that trapped him? Pulled him from the wreckage so that she might gloat? His fingers twitched as blue eyes widened. Ah! She recoiled, releasing him as he slammed a hand into her face. His hand fell to Kuroko Moore's, but it was missing, lost somewhere. There was no time to find it. Hands and fingers, nails, claws, teeth. He would use anything he had. He had to kill her. Had to. One knife hand slammed into her cheek, knocking her back. A shin slammed into the side of his knee, threatening to break his leg but for the adrenaline coursing through him. He stepped into the pain, ignored it, and pushed on to deliver his forehead straight into her nose. It would have cracked like an overripe egg, were it not for her damned aura. He smashed his head into her one more time for good measure, growling as a fist buried itself in his kidney. The flames were back, they always were, flicking around them both as she tried to incinerate him, like she had 100 times before, like she would 1,000 times more. It didn't matter. He would kill her one day. He'd never stop until she was dead and it was over. Maybe today would be that day. Stay down! She screamed, the words unlike her, filled with an emotion she lacked, but the flames were familiar if nothing more. Fire, how he hated it, consuming and unforgiving, taking everything it touched and turning it to ash, turning him to ash, to cinders. A fist slammed into his cheek. His settled in soft flesh, air driven forth. She dodged his strike that would have slammed into the underside of her chin, lashing out with a foot into his side that dove the air from his lungs. His arm came down to trap it there, elbow slamming down into the side of her bare knee. Cinder roared with pain, wrenching her leg back and limping away. With a scream of rage, fire erupted all around them, scorching his skin and driving the moisture from his eyes. Against all instincts he kept them open, ignoring the agony so that he could rush forward into the inferno. Heat rolled across him, the very air distorting and rippling waves as he reared one fist back, fully intent on beating her down and punching until there was nothing left but blood and fragments of her skull. Red eyes glared back into his own, full of pain and anger. Wait. Red? Freeze! 10 voices screamed at once. The flames winked out in an instant, lingering heat all that remained as glass and whimpers reached his ears. Across from him, his old friend stood, blood dripping from a split lip, one eye swollen. Her shoulders rose and fell with heavy pants. Amber Celia was deployed, the girl more than ready for violence that might turn deadly. Had he... No, surely not. Get down! Someone screamed, a weight impacting his back as he was driven to the floor. He had just enough time to see an officer tackle Yang in the same manner. Before he could see was flashing lights on plastic floor. The LED dance floor painting patterns into his retinas as he was pushed down onto it. You're under arrest. Any attempts to use your aura or semblance will result in force. We weren't doing anything... The blonde going through the same treatment as him yelled. only to go silent as her head was dragged up by the hair. Jean suffered the same treatment, allowing him to see the ruined nightclub with his own eyes. Here and there, suited men were dragging one another to safety. There was smashed glass and broken bottles everywhere. He didn't think there was a table still standing, and they'd been bolted to the floor. "You'll be spending the night in a fucking cell," one of the officers growled as cold metal was slammed around Jean's wrist. "Different cells, if this is the kind of damage you cause." This couldn't be happening. Just a drink. That's all he'd asked for. That and to be left alone. But fate keeps dragging him into all this madness. His father would kill him. Oh God, his mother. "Just so you know," Yang grinned as they were led outside and thrown into the back of a van together. He thought he might have even seen little Ruby, mouth wide as she watched her sister be arrested. Yang, though, she acted as though being picked up by the police was just a typical weekend for her. If that fight had continued, I'd have totally won. Jean could only stare at the woman he'd nearly killed, the woman he'd fully intended to kill. Guilt, frustration, and alcohol rose up inside him, like bile within his mouth as he thought of what he'd nearly done to her. His entire body shuddered. "Wait, don't!" she cried. Let it be known that the scream of Yang Xiaolong let out when he threw up on her face and her hair was far worse than any she had uttered in that nightclub. For Jean, throwing up on an attractive woman, it was just a typical weekend.